I'll tell you, I interviewed a number of extraordinary candidates for this job, all with sterling credentials. But what gave me confidence that this was the right man for the job, it was in talking to him and seeing his amazing family, a sense that this is somebody who knows what's right and what's wrong and is willing to act on that basis every single day.
Well, that was U.S. President Barack Obama in late October of 2013, welcoming his new FBI director, James Comey. You don't tweet much, but you did on Wednesday, with a picture of many employees of the Bureau. Here's what you said. You said, "Missing the people of the FBI today. Thank you for your commitment to truth and for all the good you do for this country." What did you mean by the word truth?
Truth is the central value in the FBI. And I hope in my country and this great country that it matters, that it's a real thing, and we measure our leaders by their distance from it. They always stray in some way from it, but we measure them by that. What's amazing about the FBI is the truth is at the center of every day. We got to find the truth, we got to tell the truth, we got to live the truth. And if we don't, we hold ourselves accountable to that. It's important to stress now because in the United States, that touchstone of truth is getting overwhelmed. Almost like a wave hitting a sandcastle at the beach. There's a risk it will melt away if we're not careful. When our president lies so much, we can become numb to it. And so in a way, my tweet was a reminder to the people of the FBI why it's cool to be in the FBI, and especially of the centrality of that value, and a reminder that also that it should be the central value in our lives.
Power itself is often a corrupting factor in government. So can you really have ethical leadership when power corrupts?
You can. Look, everyone who takes a position of power risks losing a piece of themselves. And one of the great heroes of America is Abraham Lincoln. He got elected in 1860 in part by leading some of his voters to believe he was not going to seek to abolish slavery and convinced a bunch of others of his voters that he was. He made a compromise. He was misleading in order to achieve his goals. The question is, okay, that's a moral stain of some sort. What did he do after that or around that? There are no perfect leaders. You can't be rigid. You can't be doctrinaire in a pluralistic democracy. But the difference between an ethical leader and a non-ethical leader is that ethical leader never loses sight of those North Stars, of the values that they're aspiring to be measured against, which is what makes Lincoln great and so many other leaders great. It's what worries me about our current leadership, that this president doesn't seem to have any outside reference points.
You were a prosecutor in New York, and you went after mob bosses. And you have said that President Trump's leadership style reminds you of a mob boss. I can think of all the pop culture mob bosses, but tell me what you mean by that when you say President Trump reminds you of a mob boss.
Yeah, I don't mean that he's out sticking up shopkeepers and extorting money from gamblers. I kept being struck by the comparison. A mob boss, the leadership is all about me, the leader. What do you bring to me? How are you serving me? What's your loyalty to me personally? Sometimes at the cost of your life. There are no external reference points. I was struck by the same thing by President Trump. Like I said, I first pushed it away, but it kept coming back. It's about him. What do you do for me? How are you helping me? Instead of about all the higher values that you would expect the leader of a country like ours to focus on beyond and above self.
You led the most important law enforcement agency in the United States of America. And now the FBI is under constant, weekly, sometimes daily attack by President Trump and his Republican allies in Congress. So when you see, and you talked about, maybe this is an unfair term, but love affair with the FBI, or at least the people there. When you see the leader of America and others undermine, or at least some would say undermine, the agency you love so much, what do you think about? What are you seeing?
I worry. I worry about that institution, which is part of a broader institution, the Department of Justice in the United States, which are servants of a bigger value, which is the rule of law in the United States, along with the truth, really all we are as a people. And when I see the leader of the country constantly attacking that rule of law, I worry for the future. And what I hope people do is think about their grandchildren and how are they going to explain, especially Republican leaders, that you were here and you saw that happening. Not the president criticizing a particular decision, even criticizing a particular prosecutor, but attacking the entire institution and running it down. And then while he's at it, also attacking our judiciary. I don't know how you explain that to your grandchildren. What was the trade you made that justified that? You got a tax cut? Really? Tax cuts are going to come and go. All we are as a country is that set of values. So it makes me worry.
Hasn't the FBI always been a political police force, a political force?
I don't think in the sense that I think you mean it. I think it has been in this sense. It's called upon to investigate politicians of both parties. And as I used to say to the workforce sometimes, look, the cool thing about being the FBI is that we play a lot of our games on national television. That's also the bad thing, because the whole world is watching us. Where we constantly find ourselves, especially in polarizing times like this, is in the middle of things where a whole lot of people are going to be angry and accuse us of things because we're doing our job. So it's inevitable that you are dragged onto the political playing field. I don't accept the notion that the organization has always been a political organization, or that it is now, for sure.
Republicans describe themselves as a law and order party, the party of personal responsibility. So as a longtime Republican, no longer a Republican, what happened in your estimation?
First of all, they were faced with, which the whole country was, very poor choices as a country in 2016. Right? Our nation saw the two least trusted and most unpopular people in the history of polling run against each other. And there's a great deal of frustration about the political system and globalization and lots of other things in the United States. But I think in the main, what we see happening in the Republican Party is a failure to ask the grandchildren question, which would bring right to their near field of vision the values that Republicans have long said they stood for, but are not acting like they stand for them today. And I'm optimistic that both parties in the United States will step back enough to realize what it is that unites us, and we'll have a moment of reset in a way. And then we'll get back to fighting like cats and dogs about all kinds of stuff, but a reset focused on those values.
So what we know about your Patrice, your wife and daughters, is that they supported Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
And in fact, they took part in the Women's March after the inauguration of President Trump. Has your daughter, and I don't know how old this daughter is, but has she ever said to you, listen, Dad, I wish you hadn't sent that letter to Congress 11 days before the election. I wish you wouldn't have done that. Why'd you do that, Dad?
Well, I've definitely said the first part, because I've said the same thing. I wish I wasn't in that situation. What a nightmare. I wish Anthony Weiner had never had a laptop, never been around at all. But they understood, because this they followed more closely than a lot of people. They understood how trapped we were, that the FBI had two choices and they were both really bad, one catastrophic, one just plain really bad. And so we chose the least bad. They got that. And because they've helped me edit the book and I've spent a lot of time, my 4 girls and my son, reading it, they get it. And so they don't feel, nor do I, as painful as it is, that sense that, you screwed that up, Dad, or you should have taken the other choice. Because I don't see how you could reasonably take the other choice that we faced.
So you don't regret it?
I regret the situation deeply. It was a nightmare for me. It still is. But I honestly can't say that I would do it differently if I had to go back.
Some academics and political pundits are worried about the Trump presidency, that it represents America entering an authoritarian phase. And maybe that's too big of a word for some, not for others, in terms of its history. How would you say the democratic institutions that were set up to be a watchdog on power in the United States have functioned during the Trump presidency?
This is an answer that may surprise you. Surprisingly well. The institutions in the United States, especially those centered on justice, are really hard to change. Hard to change when you're a leader like I was, trying to change the emphasis on diversity to improve that. But the good news is that inertia, that difficulty in changing, is the ballast for America. No president serves long enough to screw it up. I hear this term deep state. That's nonsense. There's no deep state, but there is a deep culture that runs through the law enforcement community, the justice community, the intelligence community, and the military services in the United States, a commitment to the rule of law and a disdain for politicians because they sometimes talk in weaselly ways, a hatred for weaselness. Well, that culture is so deep that it steadies the ship. And again, if a president were going to serve for 20 years or 25 years, you might worry. But we will be okay. What I'm trying to be part of is making sure we have a conversation today so that we emerge from this period, which I liken to a forest fire. There'll be lots of growth and all kinds of cool things, but so that we minimize the damage and accelerate the healing coming out of this.
We started our conversation with hearing President Obama welcoming you to the position of FBI director. I don't want you to go back in time per se, but say James Comey of 2013 was standing in front of you as he begins his career as director. What warning do you give him? What do you say to him?
I say, drive over to the State Department and tell Hillary Clinton she ought to be using the State Department system for her communications. I don't know, even in hindsight. I mean, there's small things I would warn me about, but I knew in 2015 when that email case was open, my deputy director looked at me and said, with a wry smile, "You know you're totally screwed, right?" And I smiled and said, "Yep, nobody gets out alive."